Hi and welcome to Big Door Trading Channel. Today we will learn how to create a stochastic indicator using the Python script language from the TradingView platform. To start, we need to open our Python editor. We do this by clicking on this button right here. After opening the tool, we need to start the indicator code by saying which language version we are going to use. There are currently 4 versions of the Python script language. A compiler directive must be used in the first line of a script to specify the version. After saying the code version, we need to jump to the second line and say whether our code will be a study or a strategy. A study must contain at least one function call which produces some output on the chart. It is used in the construction of indicators. The strategy function is used to build strategies for backtests. As I said at the beginning, today we are going to build the stochastic indicator, and therefore in this second line we need to use the study function. After placing this function, we need to open the parentheses, and within the parentheses we can put various information about our indicator, such as title, short title, overlay, format, precision, and more. But we don't need to use all of that. Just the title and overlay parameters are enough. We put title equal to the name of the strategy, exactly as I am doing here. After saying the name of the strategy, we need to configure the overlay parameter. It serves to say whether we want to plot the indicator together with the price chart or in a separate window. If we want to place the indicator together with the price chart, then the overlay must be equal to true. If we want to place the indicator in a separate window, then the overlay must be equal to false. Here I will plot the stochastic in a separate window. On the third line of this code, we are finally going to build our stochastic indicator. The first thing to do is create a variable that will store the stochastic formula. Doing this is very simple. I will create a variable called stochastic and store the indicator formula inside it. The first part of the stochastic formula is this one. Then just take this result and divide by the highest high for a given period minus the lowest low for a given period. To finalize the formula, we need to take that result and multiply it by 100. Note that this result will be stored in the stochastic variable. Now that we have our indicator calculated, I'm going to use a plot function to put that indicator on the chart. Notice how easy it is to use the plot function. You just need to put the value you want to print on the screen inside the parentheses. After we do that, our code is ready. Now just click on Add to the chart and see how it looks. If you want to add levels in the stochastic, just add more plots and add them to the chart again. In the previous class, we learned how to program fast stochastic in period 5. Today, we are going to learn how to put some settings in our indicator so that it can be calibrated without having to modify its code. To make it clear what we are going to do, we will include in the chart the standard stochastic offered by TradingView itself. Let's click on this option indicator and look for stochastic. Type the word stochastic and click on it. When we do this, the indicator will be inserted in the chart. Now let's configure the stochastic so that it looks just like the stochastic we created in the last class. Let's remove all these ornaments and put K for 5, D for 1, and Smooth for 1. After doing this, notice that the two indicators were exactly the same. However, if we try to modify our stochastic that we created in the previous class, you will notice that we were unable to make any changes to the indicator using this window. But don't worry, that's what we are going to learn to do today. We will transform our stochastic into an indicator that can be calibrated through inputs. To do this, the first thing is to know what inputs we want to include in our code. In this lesson, we will learn how to create an input that defines the stochastic period. That is, we will allow the user to decide what the value of K will be. Now that we know what our input will be, it's time to get our hands dirty and make it happen. Start by writing what name your input will receive in the code, in which case I will call this input K. Now K needs to be able to receive the value that the user selects in the properties window. Then K must be equal to the input function. Open the parentheses and organize the parameters of the input function. It is important to say that the input function has some parameters, but we will only use two parameters, the default value and the title that will appear to the user. Within the parentheses, start by saying the default period that your indicator will have when it is inserted in the chart. In that case, I will want period 5, then put a comma and use the title parameter to say the title of the input in the properties window. That done, just replace all the numbers for the stochastic period with the input we created. In all places where we have the number 5, we will change it to the word K, as it will store the period that the user selects. Now just click on Add to the chart and see how it looks. You can now configure stochastic outside the code. In the last class, we learned how to add an input to the stochastic indicator that we created. I showed that in a few lines of code it was possible to create a stochastic much like the standard stochastic offered by TradingView itself. Today we will learn how to insert a moving average in the chart using the Pine editor. To begin this lesson, we will include in the chart a standard moving average offered by TradingView itself. Note that in this settings window, it is possible to change some settings such as length, source, and more. That's exactly what we're going to do. To start, open your Pine editor by clicking on this button. Delete everything written in your Pine editor so that we can start a new code from scratch. In the first line of the code, we need to specify which language version we are going to use. Since version 4 is the most recent, I will use version 4. In the second line of the code, we need to say whether our code is going to be an indicator or if the code is going to be a strategy. It is important that you understand that the Pine editor serves to build both indicators and trading strategies. Therefore, we always need to say at the beginning of the code what we are going to program. For this, there are two functions that defines the type of code, the study function and the strategy function. I will use the study function, as this code will aim to plot a moving average on the chart. I will define the code name and the overlay. In this case, the overlay must be equal to true, as we will want to plot the moving average along with the price chart and not in a separate window. Now let's go to line 4. Here I am going to create a variable called A. This variable I will use to store the moving average value. After writing the name of your variable, you need to put the equal sign and then use the function that returns the moving average value. This function is called SMA, and it is able to return the values of a moving average according to the parameters placed within the parentheses. The first parameter is the value you want to use as a source to calculate the average. In that case, I want an average based on the closing price. The second parameter consists of the length of this moving average. In that case, I will want a 20-period moving average. Now let's go to line 7. Here I am going to use the plot function to bring to the chart this value that we get in the code. Just write the word plot and insert within the parentheses the variable we use to store the moving average value. When finished, click the Add to Chart button and see how it looks. The moving average was successfully plotted on the chart. However, it is not yet possible to modify the moving average using the settings window. To do this, let's go back to the Pine editor and add some inputs to the code. The first input will serve for the user to choose which source will be used to calculate the average. So let's create a variable called moving average source and use the input function to store what the user chooses in the properties window. We will use the same parameters taught in the past class. First, I will tell what the default value will be, and then I need to say what the title of this parameter will be in the settings window. The second input will serve for the user to choose the period of the moving average. The process to be done is the same as in line 4. Now, all we need to do is use these variables that store the values chosen by the user and insert them in the function of the moving average. That done, just add it to the chart again. Note that we can now configure the moving average using the settings window. Although this class is technically simple, it is very important for those who are starting to learn a first programming language. In today's class, we will learn about variable declaration and variable assignment, two very important subjects for everyone who wants to learn more deeply how to use the Pine editor. But what is a variable? In programming, in a simple way, the variable is a word that you will create at the beginning of your code so that it can be used to store important values for your strategy. For example, we can create a variable called myClosingPrice and use it to store the closing price of the stock. This variable will be called by the name you enter and we will store what you want. Just as we use boxes to store objects, so we use variables to store values that are important for the strategy we are creating. Whenever we are going to declare a variable, we need to say what its type is, that is, what it will store. There are three main types: int, use it to store whole numbers. Float, use it to store numbers with decimal place. And bool, use it to store the word true or the word false. The following is an example of how to declare a variable in order to use it to store integers. First, you write the word var. This causes it to be declared only once. Then, write the type of your variable. Then, write the name. And finally, put the equal sign and write the word not. This is just one of the ways that the Python editor offers us to declare variables. Now, see an example of how to declare a variable in order to use it to store numbers with decimal place. First, you write the word var. This causes it to be declared only once. Then, write the type of your variable. Then, write the name, and finally, put the equal sign and write the word not. Now that we have our variables created, we need to learn how to work with them in the code. So it is important that you learn the concept of variable assignment. Every time you want to use the variable you created at the beginning of the code to store some value, we need to use a special symbol that has the functionality to make your variable store the value you requested. For example, suppose we want to store the number 7 inside a variable that we created. To do this, we will first write the name of the variable, place the attribution symbol, and say which number we want to store in the variable, which in this case is number 7. It is important to say that the number must be compatible with the type you have defined for your variable. Now let's suppose that we want to store the number 7.77 inside a variable that we created. To do this, we will first write the name of the variable, place the attribution symbol, and say which number we want to store in the variable, which in this case is the number 7.77. It is important to say that the number must be compatible with the type you have defined for your variable. To conclude this lesson, we will print these two values on the chart. We do this using the plot function. That done. Now let's click on this button and see how it looks. Our two variables were successfully plotted. In today's class, we will learn how to create the famous MACD indicator using the Python editor from the TradingView platform. To begin this lesson, we will include in the chart a standard MACD offered by TradingView itself. Note that in this settings window, it is possible to change some important settings for this indicator. Our job today is to recreate that MACD. To start, open your Python editor by clicking on this button right here. Delete everything written in your Python editor so that we can start a new code from scratch. In the first line of the code, we need to say which language version we are going to use. As version 4 is the most recent, so I will use version 4. In the second line of the code, we need to say whether our code is going to be an indicator or if the code is going to be a strategy. This code will be used to create an indicator, so I will use the study function. If you have questions about this part, watch the past classes where I talked about it. I will define the code title and the overlay. In this case, the overlay must be equal to false, as we will want to plot the MACD in a separate window. Before starting the construction of MACD, let's get to know a little more about this indicator. MACD is an indicator of technical analysis based on moving averages that show downward or upward trends. MACD is the acronym for Moving Average Convergence Divergence. The indicator was created by Jared Apple in the 1960s. It is calculated by making the difference between a short-term moving average and a long-term moving average. The construction of the MACD therefore uses three main elements: a long-term exponential moving average, a short-term exponential moving average, and a exponential moving average of the MACD itself. Now that we know a little about this indicator, the first thing we should do is to define what the short-term exponential average will be used in calculating the indicator. So I'm going to create a variable called fastLength and store the exponential average of 12 periods inside it. The function that returns the exponential moving average is called EMMA. Within the parameters, I need to define the source of the average calculation and the length. The second thing we should do in our code is to define what the long-term exponential average will be used in calculating the indicator. Then I will create a variable called slowLength and store the value of the exponential average of 26 period inside it. The function that returns the exponential moving average is called EMMA. Within the parameters, I need to define the source of the average calculation and the length. Now let's create a variable called MACD. This variable will store the difference between a short-term moving average and a long-term moving average. Put the equal sign and use the two variables we created above to make this calculation. After that, we will calculate the signal value. We do this by calculating an exponential moving average of the MACD itself. Now that we have our indicator calculated, I'm going to use a plot function to put that indicator on the chart. Now just click on Add to the chart and see how it looks. However, it is not yet possible to modify the MACD using the settings window. To do this, let's go back to the Pine editor and add some inputs to the code. The first input will aim to allow the user to define the value to be used in a short-term moving average variable. Define the name of the variable that will store the user-defined value. Start by writing what name your input will receive in the code, in which case I will call this input fast. Now, fast needs to be able to receive the value that the user selects in the properties window. We will do this using the input function. Within the parentheses, start by saying the default period of the short-term moving average. In this case, I will want the period 12. Then put a comma and use the title parameter to say the title of the input in the properties window. Repeat the process for all other inputs for your indicator. That done, just insert each input in its respective place in the code so that the user is able to configure the MACD through the properties window. Now just click on Add to the chart and see how it looks. You can now configure MACD outside the code. Today I want to show you how to make your strategy make simple decisions. To do this, we use the word if. Alright, so simply write the word if and open the parentheses. Here you will test something. For example, I will write a test to find out if A is greater than B. Note that A is equal to 7 and B is equal to 3. If this test is true, that is, if A is greater than B, it will execute a specific piece of code. For example, let's say that if A is greater than B, then it must store the blue color within a variable. Okay? The first thing to continue this code is to skip a line, then just click on the tab key, OK, and write the piece of code you wanted to execute if A is greater than B. In this case, I'm going to store the blue color inside a variable that I call C. Now I'm going to use the bar color function to paint all the bars in the chart with the color stored inside the variable C. Okay, if I add this to the chart, you will notice that all the bars will be painted blue. And this was because during the execution of the code, the variable A was always greater than the variable B. But if I change the logic of the test and say that A must be less than B, you will notice that no bars will be painted. Observe. But I can also write a piece of code to be executed if the test response is false. All I need to do is use the word else, then skip a line and click the tab key and write the piece of code you want it to execute if the test answer is false. In this case, I'm going to store the yellow color inside a variable that I call C. Okay, so now just click on that button and let's see how it looks. Notice that he painted all the bars yellow. In today's class, we will learn how to develop an algorithm capable of identifying whether the market is in an up or down trend. The idea is to paint all bars that are above the 50-period moving average with green, and paint all bars that are below the 50-period moving average with red. So we will open the Python editor by clicking on this button. In the first line of the code, I need to say which language version I'm gonna use. Here I will use version 4. In the second line, I will put the study function, as this code is not a backtest strategy. Okay, now I will define the code title and say that the overlay must be equal to true. In this way, the moving average will be plotted along with the price chart. Now let's create a variable called X to use it to store the color in which we want to paint the bars. Now I'm going to create two variables, right? Two variables. A variable called A that I will use to store the closing price of the bar, and another variable called B that I will use to store the value of the 50-period moving average. Okay, now we need to create a logical test to find out if the closing price is greater than the value of the moving average. So all we need to do is just write that A must be greater than B. Okay, if that is true, then I want to store the green color inside the variable X. Okay, so let's repeat that. If A is greater than B, then I want to store the green color inside the variable X. If the closing price is greater than the 50-period moving average, then I want to store the green color inside the variable X. Okay, now we need to create a second logical test to see if the closing price is less than the value of the moving average. And if that is true, I want to store the red color inside the variable X. Now just use the bar color function to send a command so that the bars of the chart will be painted with the color that is stored inside the variable X. Okay, and just click on that button, add to the chart, right? And let's see how it looks. All the bars that are above the moving average have been painted green, and all the bars that are below the moving average have been painted red. Alright, so that's it. In today's lesson, we will learn how to create an indicator that I have called the moving average cloud. What we are going to do is take a 12-period exponential moving average and move 3% upward, and take a 12-period exponential moving average and move 3% downward. Okay, to start we need to open our Pine editor, and we do this by clicking on this button right here. In the first line, we will tell the compiler which language version of Pine script we are going to use, and I will use version 4. Now let's use the study function and define the code title and also the overlay. In this case, the overlay must be equal to true, because this indicator will be plotted together with the price chart. Now let's start the construction of our indicator. For that, I will create a first variable that should store the value of the exponential moving average of 12 periods. Alright, this variable I will call source, and I will put a equal sign and store within this variable a value of the exponential moving average of 12 periods. Now we are going to create a variable called upper. That variable should store the top line of the indicator. The calculation to be made is as follows. I will take the value of the source variable and multiply it by 3%, so that we have a top line that will always be above the center line. Okay, now you will create a variable called lower. This variable should store the indicator's bottom line. The calculation to be made is as follows. I'm going to take the value of the source variable and divide it by 3%, so we will have a final result that will always be below the center line. And that's it. Now just use the plot function to plot all that values on the chart. Now just click on that button and let's see how it looks. Now we have a moving average cloud. If you want to copy this code for free, visit the website. The link is in the description. I hope this video was helpful. Please subscribe to the channel so that I can continue posting more videos.